How did people sleep in the Middle Ages, when there was no central heating, no soft mattresses, not even silence? We imagine dark, cold nights as endless suffering. But what if the medieval English peasant lounging in his smoky hut actually slept better, and perhaps even truer than we do in our warm, comfortable, but stress-filled bedrooms? This story takes you to a world where sleep was not just a rest, but an art of survival, a complex system of rituals, tricks, and social practices developed over centuries to combat cold and darkness. This is the story of how our ancestors turned their humble dwellings into warm cocoons and their families into living warmers. How did they use the laws of physics without knowing them? Why were their dirty clothes more effective than our clean ones? And what sleep rhythm, forgotten today, may be the key to our own health? Today, we're going to reveal 10 ingenious ways that helped medieval Englishmen not just survive the freezing winter, but also get a good night's sleep. Are you ready to learn that sleep in the past was not torture, but a surprisingly clever strategy? Then let's get started. At dusk, a church bell was rung throughout medieval England. This was the fire-extinguishing bell, or curfew from the Old French couvre-feu, to cover the fire. For a peasant family, it was not just a signal to go to sleep, but the beginning of an important, almost sacred evening ritual honed by centuries of survival. The fire in the hearth, the living heart of the house, the main source of warmth and light, was too precious to burn all night. It had to be canned rather than extinguished. This term is not accidental. In many English towns and villages, ringing the bell in the evenings was not just a custom, but an official regulation, a fire safety measure in a world of wooden and thatched roofs where a single spark could destroy an entire village. At this signal, every householder was obliged to dim his hearth. In this way, the personal stratagem of saving precious fuel was woven into the system of public safety. The head of the family went into action. Using a simple wooden spatula or a pair of sticks, he gathered the largest, densest, red-hot coals into the center of the hearth and carefully covered them with a thick layer of dry ash from previous fires. It was an art. It was necessary to choose the right coals, from hard, dense wood such as oak or beech, which had a high heat capacity and smoldered long and hot. Coals from quick-burning alder or resinous pine were not suitable for this purpose. The ash layer, which in itself is an excellent heat insulator, had to be of perfect thickness. Too thin a layer would not be able to cut off oxygen and the coals would quickly burn. Too thick, and they would suffocate and cool down. Correctly performed procedure almost completely cut off the access of oxygen, and the fire went from burning to extremely slow, economical smoldering, keeping the precious heat in its core for 8 to 10 hours until the morning. As the fire fell asleep under its ashy blanket, the family prepared for a nighttime siege. The process was like battening down the hatches on a ship before a storm. The door, which was made of rough, uneven boards and never fit tightly, was carefully plugged all around with moss, hemp, old rags, or specially woven straw bundles. A heavy hide or a piece of dense felt was hung on top of it from the inside, creating an additional barrier against icy drafts. Window openings, if there were any, were closed tightly with wooden shutters, and the gaps around them were also blocked with moss. Poultry were driven into special wicker cages in the corner of the hut, and livestock received their last portion of hay in the attached stable. All life in the house would freeze, shrink, turning the dwelling into an airtight cocoon, ready to withstand the long and cold night. This ritual was not only practical, but also deeply psychological. The sound of the bell, the procedure of covering the fire, the methodical plugging of gaps, all this created a sense of order, control, and security in the face of the night darkness, which in the medieval mind was inhabited not only by cold, but also by evil spirits. And when the house was finally sealed and the fire was safely covered, the main living and most reliable heating system, the family itself, came into play. In the cramped peasant hut, there were no separate bedrooms, and in most cases, not even beds as we understand them. The bed was one large straw-filled mattress, so-called pallet, or simply a thick layer of fresh, fragrant straw spread on the earthen floor or on a low wooden plank in the warmest and most draft-proof corner of the room. And on this common bed slept the whole family, from infants to hunched old men, turning every night into a single human furnace. It was the most efficient, the oldest, and absolutely free heating system known to mankind, based on pure physics and social cohesion. The principle was ingenious in its simplicity and consisted of an intuitive understanding of thermodynamics. The tighter bodies are pressed against each other, the smaller their total surface area in contact with the cold air, and the more efficiently they retain the heat released by each organism. One human body at rest generates about 100 watts of heat. A family of 6 thus generated more than half a kilowatt of heat energy. In the small, sealed space of the hut and under the common shelter, this energy was not wasted, but created a tangible effect. The arrangement on this bed was strictly hierarchized and thought out to the smallest detail. In the very center, as in the warmest and safest place, as if in a nucleus, the most vulnerable, small children and infants, were placed. They were surrounded on all sides by the warm bodies of adults and older children, creating a living, breathing cocoon, protected from any draft. On the edges, on the coldest and most dangerous places, the strongest and healthiest adults, usually the father of the family and the eldest sons, lay down. They served as a kind of outer walls, taking the brunt of the cold coming from the walls and the earthen floor. Old men, more sensitive to the cold and with slower metabolism, also tried to sit closer to the center, near the children, weaving their fading warmth into the common cauldron. Often a dog would curl up at the feet, at the very edge of the lodge, or even on top of the skins that covered the family, its higher body temperature and thick fur making it a valuable addition to the common furnace. This collective sleeping arrangement was not just a forced measure due to cramped quarters. It was a conscious, centuries-honed survival strategy. The breath of several people, concentrated under a common shelter, made the air in the immediate vicinity of their faces a little warmer and more humid, making it easier to breathe in the freezing room. The heat generated by the bodies was trapped under a common shelter, be it a heavy sheepskin or a coarse patchwork quilt. This created a unique microclimate that allowed them to survive even the most severe frosts. This way of sleeping also strengthened family ties incredibly. Physical closeness, breathing together, feeling the warmth of another body in total darkness and penetrating cold created a powerful sense of unity, security, and absolute trust. It was not just a dream, but a nightly ritual to confirm that they were a family, a single organism capable of withstanding the chaos and cold of the outside world. Many medieval English peasant houses, especially in the northern and harsher regions, were of the longhouse type. It was an elongated structure with both the human dwelling and the byre under one long thatched roof, separated only by a thin inner wall of wicker and clay or by a wattle and daub fence. To the hygiene-obsessed modern man, such neighborliness seems the height of unsanitation. But to the medieval peasant, it was an ingenious, vital heating trick, the difference between life and death. A cow, a couple of oxen, a few sheep or pigs kept in a stable were real live, round-the-clock radiators. A large animal such as a cow, in the process of digesting coarse food, releases a huge amount of metabolic heat, up to 1 kilowatt, which is comparable to the operation of a small electric heater. This heat warmed the common wall between the stable and the living area of the house, making it perceptibly warmer than the other walls facing the street. The family instinctively tried to make their common bed by this warm wall, receiving constant passive heating from their most valuable possession. The lightweight, often leaky partition was not a disadvantage, but a clever solution that allowed heat to freely penetrate into the living area. In addition, the slow rotting and composting process of manure and thick straw bedding in the stable also generated a considerable amount of heat. This biothermal process, known today to gardeners as the warm bed principle, additionally heated the earthen floor of the stable and through it the adjacent living space. The odor, of course, was corresponding, sharp, ammoniacal, mixed with the smell of straw and warm bodies of animals. But one got used to it from birth, and the advantages in the form of additional free heat outweighed all the inconveniences. Moreover, the smoke from the hearth, which penetrated into the stable, served as a natural disinfectant and insecticide, repelling flies and parasites from the animals. Livestock breath also increased the humidity of the air in the whole house, making it less dry and irritating to the lungs in winter. This house structure was a perfect closed ecosystem. Cattle provided not only milk, meat, wool, and draft power, but also warmth and even valuable fertilizer, which was taken to the fields in the spring. People in turn protected their animals from frost, icy winds, and predators such as wolves or foxes. It was a perfect symbiosis, dictated by harsh necessity and a deep understanding of nature. In the bitterest frosts, especially during calving, the weakest lambs or calves could be brought directly into the living part of the house and laid by the hearth. Their small, trembling bodies were not only an object of care, but also an additional source of warmth, and their rescue was a guarantee of the family's future well-being. Thus, the whole house, from people to animals, worked as a single, complex heating system where every living organism contributed to the common cause of survival. The cold in a peasant hut came from everywhere, but its main sources were the icy, damp earth floor and the cold, blowing walls. To create a reliable barrier between the human body and these surfaces, peasants used the cheapest, most accessible, and most versatile insulation material, straw. They didn't just sleep on it, they literally built a warm cocoon out of it for sleeping, creating a complex multi-layered system where each layer had its own important function. It was not a whim, but a well-thought-out survival technique. First, straw was densely stuffed into large bags of coarse cloth to create mattresses known as pallets. The thick, resilient straw mattress created a layer of air that interrupted the conductive transfer of cold from the ground to the body. The quality of the straw was important. Softer, more resilient oat or barley straw was used for the mattresses. This mattress was the main barrier separating the warmth of the human body from the permafrost of the earth. It had to be shaken out and restuffed regularly to prevent the straw from sticking together and losing its insulating properties. Second, a thick layer of straw, dry fern, or reeds covered the entire earthen floor of the hut. This was not just litter, but a managed system of deep bedding. The lower layers, mixed with moisture from the ground, food scraps, and other organic waste, began to slowly rot and decompose. This composting process released a small but constant geothermal heat, heating the floor from below. In this way, the floor itself became a low-temperature heater. The top layers were regularly renewed with fresh straw to keep them relatively dry and clean. The warm bedding was certainly teeming with life, from mice to fleas, but warmth was more important than hygiene. But there was a third, less obvious trick. On the coldest nights, the peasants could cover their common bed on all sides with armfuls or tight sheaves of straw. They created a kind of low temporary wall, a cozy nest that protected the sleepers from the drafts walking across the floor. A family sleeping on a mattress and surrounded on all sides by these straw walls was in the center of a warm, insulated cocoon. Often, such a straw wall separated the sleeping people from the coldest outer wall of the hut, creating an additional insulating gap. Sometimes straw and dry moss were even used to stuff the space between the wooden planking, if any, and the main earthen wall. Yes, it was extremely flammable, and a single spark from the hearth could lead to instant disaster. But in the desperate struggle for survival, when the lives of children were at stake, all means were good, and keeping warm was an absolute priority. The clothes of the medieval English peasant were his main defense, his personal shelter, which he wore around the clock. And here, too, there was an ingenious cunning of its own, which to a modern man obsessed with cleanliness would seem strange and even repulsive. The secret was not only in the multiple layers, but also in the fact that woolen clothes were almost never washed, especially in winter. The upper garments, tunics and cloaks, were made of coarse, homespun sheep's wool. The natural animal fat, lanolin, was preserved in wool that had not been washed or only slightly washed in cold water. This substance, which protects the sheep themselves from the weather, has excellent water-repellent properties. Clothes impregnated with lanolin hardly ever got wet in rain or sleet. Droplets simply rolled off its greasy surface without penetrating. This was vital for people who spent a lot of time outdoors. Moreover, lanolin made wool fibers more elastic and dense, and the fabric itself more windproof. Such dirty, greasy clothes were much warmer and more functional than clean, soft, and fluffy ones. Sure, it had a peculiar smell of sheepskin mixed with the smell of sweat and smoke, and it was stiff to the touch, but these shortcomings were more than compensated for by its unrivaled protective properties. Washing, especially with the use of aggressive lye, a mixture of ash and water, completely washed out the precious lanolin, making the clothes vulnerable to moisture and wind. Therefore, only the lower linen shirts, which were in direct contact with the body, were washed. The upper woolen garments were only periodically shaken out, brushed with a stiff bristle brush and ventilated by the fire. This may seem unhygienic to us, but in terms of survival in the damp and cold English climate, it was an absolutely sensible and ingenious decision. The very structure of the wool fiber, its natural curvature, creates millions of tiny air pockets. It is this trapped air, not the fiber itself, that is the main insulator. Wool is unique in that it retains this structure and its insulating properties even when wet, unlike cotton or linen. This wisdom of not letting nature do its work was also manifested in the attitude towards the natural rhythm of sleep. In a world without electricity, darkness meant the end of activity, and there was a deep wisdom in this that we have almost lost today. Medieval peasants did not try to conquer the night. They embraced it and lived in harmony with the natural cycles of light and darkness, which, as modern research shows, could be much healthier. As the sun set, the family gathered around the hearth. Any additional light, a tallow candle or a beam, was precious and used sparingly. People spent most of the evening in semi-darkness. This naturally prepared the body for sleep. The brain, not receiving bright light stimuli, as from our modern lamps and screens, began to produce melatonin, the sleep hormone, in time. Peasants went to bed very early, shortly after sunset. Their sleep was often biphasic or segmented. The first sleep lasted a few hours before midnight. This was followed by a period of nightly wakefulness lasting an hour and a half. This period, called vigil, was not considered insomnia, but a normal and productive part of the night. During this time, people could talk quietly, make love, pray, reflect on the past day, or just sit in silence around smoldering embers. Then they would go back to sleep, falling into a second sleep that lasted until dawn. Modern sleep scientists and historians, such as Roger Ekirch, believe that such segmented sleep may be more natural to humans than our monolithic 8-hour sleep pattern, which is a product of the industrial age. The imposed need to sleep through the night without interruption may be one of the causes of many modern sleep disorders. Our ancestors may have slept more intermittently, but their sleep was deeper and better synchronized with their internal biological clock. Thus, the darkness of the Middle Ages was a blessing as well as a deprivation. It made people live in the rhythm of nature, which had a positive effect on their health. They did not suffer from insomnia caused by the blue light of the screens. Their circadian rhythms were in perfect harmony with the world around them, and the night vigil provided a unique opportunity for quiet reflection and intimacy that is so lacking in our hectic world. Getting into a cold, damp bed of straw in an unheated hut was a real challenge. The sudden change in temperature could cause chills and even sickness. To make this process at least a little more pleasant and to warm up faster, peasants used primitive but ingenious warmers, using the main heat accumulator in the house, the hearth. The simplest and most common variant was an ordinary stone, a smooth, flat river stone or a piece of sandstone that would not crack from the heat was chosen. During the day or evening, it was kept in hot ashes at the edge of the hearth. Before going to bed, this heated stone was quickly removed with special tongs or just sticks and wrapped in several layers of old dense cloth or a piece of sheepskin to avoid burning and to keep it warm longer. This homemade heating pad was placed in bed, usually in the feet, sometime before going to bed. The stone slowly and evenly gave its heat to the straw mattress, warming it up and, very importantly, evaporating the excess moisture that rose from the dirt floor. Climbing into the warm and dry nest was incomparably more pleasant and safer for health. Sometimes such a stone was left in the feet for the whole night as a source of constant, though diminishing heat. Another trick was the use of hot ashes. The ashes and small, long, smoldering embers from the hearth were poured into a sturdy clay pot with a tight lid. Such a pot also became an excellent and durable warming pot that could be placed in the bed. It was safer than open fryers and gave a gentle, long-lasting heat for several hours. In wealthier homes, metal bedwarming pans, a kind of frying pan with a long handle and lid that was filled with coals and swept over the bed before going to sleep, could also be used. These simple methods were available to every family and required no extra cost. They were part of the daily evening routine, a small ritual that made a harsh winter night a little more bearable. This art of using stored heat was one of the most important household tricks to cheat the cold. The hut of rods and clay, for all its breathable advantage, was not airtight. The icy winter wind, relentless and omnipresent, found hundreds of loopholes to get inside and blow away the precious, hard-won warmth. Therefore, one of the main winter concerns of the peasant was a total, methodical war against drafts, turning his house into a semblance of a besieged fortress. The main battlefield was the door. The wooden door, made of rough, often uneven boards, never fit tightly to the jamb. Therefore, a heavy curtain was hung on it from the inside for the winter. Ideally, it was a thick cowhide or bearskin. In poorer houses, it was a piece of dense felt or several layers of sacking. In essence, this created a primitive but effective vestibule system. The outer door was opened briefly, and a heavy inner curtain kept the icy air from entering the living space. All known cracks in the walls were carefully caulked. For this purpose, they used moss, soot, old rags, woolen hairs mixed with clay and manure for viscosity. In the fall, the whole family was engaged in this work, carefully inspecting every inch of the walls. The foot of the walls, where they joined the earthen floor, was often covered with dense rolls of tightly twisted straw or cut layers of turf to block the coldest airflow. The window openings, as already mentioned, were practically sealed for the winter, but even closed wooden shutters let the wind through. Therefore, they were additionally covered with cloth from the inside, and all the gaps around the frame were carefully stuffed with moss. But here the peasant faced a dilemma: the smoke hole in the roof. It could not be sealed completely. So a simple wooden flap was often made for it, or a flat stone was adapted to partially cover the opening during a heavy snowstorm, leaving only a small slit for the draft. This was a constant, dangerous compromise between keeping warm and the risk of burning. Furniture was also used in this warfare. A massive chest or bench was pushed up against the coldest windward wall, creating an additional barrier. This elaborate total insulation strategy was key to keeping warm. Survival on a cold night depended not only on external sources of heat, but also on internal fire, the metabolism of the human body. Medieval peasants intuitively understood that food was not just to satisfy hunger, but fuel for their own bodies, which had to burn long and hot to withstand the cold. The winter diet was very different from the summer diet and was based on the principles of maximum caloric intake and slow release of energy. The winter table was based on a thick, rich broth known as pottage. It was not a soup as we know it, but rather a thick porridge that was cooked in a single pot over the hearth all day long. It was based on slow carbohydrates, whole grains of barley, oats, spelt, which took a long time to digest, providing a stable level of energy for many hours. Everything that was available was added to the chowder: dried peas, beans, root vegetables that could be stored all winter, turnips, parsnips, carrots. The key element to increase the caloric content was fat. Pork lard, beef fat, or mutton fat were added to the chowder. Fats are the most concentrated source of energy, and they were absolutely essential for generating metabolic heat. Even a small piece of lard could significantly increase the calorific value of dinner. If possible, they added pieces of salted or smoked pork, which also provided the body with protein and salt necessary for water-salt balance. Bread was another pillar of the winter diet. It was not light wheat bread, but heavy, dense loaves of rye or barley flour, often with bran added. Such bread also required long digestion and gave a long feeling of satiety and energy. It was dipped directly into hot chowder, turning the meal into a nourishing and warming action. They drank it all with ale or weak beer, which was also caloric and considered safer than water from dubious sources. This dense, fatty, carbohydrate-rich dinner was not gluttony, but a vital part of the preparation for sleep. It energized the body's internal furnace, giving it fuel to survive the long hours of nighttime cold when external sources of heat were almost exhausted. Survival in winter was not only a physical, but also the toughest psychological challenge. Long, dark nights, penetrating cold, monotony of food, boredom, and constant subconscious fear. All this put pressure on the psyche. And sleep under these conditions was not just a physiological need, but a kind of mental strategy, a way to survive the most difficult and depressing time of the year. Winter was a time of natural slowing down, almost human hibernation. When work in the field stopped and the daylight hours shrank to a few hours, life went into energy conservation mode. People slept more, not only because it was dark, but also because sleep helped to save precious calories, which were in short supply in the meager winter diet. Long, albeit intermittent, sleep was a way to sleep through the hunger and cold, to shorten the agonizing time spent awake in a dank hut. It was also a time for inner peace, for strengthening intangible ties. In the quiet of the long evenings, lulled by the crackling of the hearth and the howling of the wind outside, people immersed themselves in the world of oral tradition. This was the prime season for storytelling, legends of saints and heroes, spooky tales of ghosts and fairies. Old men passed on their experience to the young. Mothers taught their daughters to spin by firelight. Sleep was often interspersed with slumber and reflection on these stories. It was not the anxious sleep of modern man, preoccupied with deadlines. It was a sleep woven into the natural rhythm of nature and culture. Acceptance of discomfort was a key element of this psychology. The medieval peasant did not expect sleep to be comfortable in our sense. He did not complain about a hard bed, about his neighbor snoring, or about being poked in his sleep by a dog. His body was accustomed from childhood to deprivation, and his mind to patience. Comfort was not a soft bed, but simply having a roof over one's head, no penetrating wind, and the warmth of a living being nearby. Their scale of comfort was completely different, and that was their strength. This mental adaptability, the ability to find peace and solace in the simplest things, the warmth of the hearth, the closeness of family, the ancient stories of ancestors, was the invisible force that helped them survive the winter. Their sleep was not an escape from reality, but a complete acceptance of it, an immersion in its slow, dark, but natural rhythm. The life of a medieval English peasant in winter was full of hardship and difficulty, but it was not a story of hopelessness. It was a story of incredible resilience and ingenuity, a story of how people with next to nothing managed to create warmth and sustain life through ingenious and simple tricks. They turned their families into human ovens, lived in symbiosis with animals, turning them into living radiators, and built real insulating cocoons out of simple straw. They accepted darkness as an ally, and their food was an elaborate fuel for internal heating. But their main trick was not technology, but psychology, the ability to accept discomfort and live in harmony with the harsh rhythms of nature. Studying their experience, we see that genius does not always lie in sophisticated technology. Sometimes it manifests itself in a deep understanding of nature, in the ability to make the most of what is at hand, and, most importantly, in the strength of the human spirit and family ties. The story of their survival is a hymn to human adaptation that makes us wonder if, in our quest for absolute comfort, we have become more fragile and disconnected from the natural rhythms of life. If you are interested in this journey into the past and you want to know more about how our ancestors solved problems that seem unsolvable to us, give us a like and subscribe to our channel. There are many more amazing stories about forgotten tricks and ingenious ideas born in the depths of centuries ahead of you.